Hey everyone, welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's June 14th, 2023. My name's Eric Osterman and I'll be your host. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse helps teams conquer AWS using our rock-solid blueprints with Terraform. Whether you're starting from scratch or just not that satisfied with what you have today, book a session with me by going to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. Answer a few quick questions, and I'll show you exactly what your future could look like. For those of you new to the call, the format is informal. My goal is to answer your questions. If you're curious about Cloud Posse or any of our open source tools and modules, this is a great place to ask. For those of us joining through the podcast or YouTube channel, we host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded, so we'll be posting a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. You can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to youtube.com. Actually cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, cloudposse.com/office hours. And the YouTube channel is youtube.com/cloudposse. youtube.com/cloudposse. You know, I say this often enough, you'd think I'd have it memorized. All right. Talk to you guys soon here and after announcements. Let's see. All right, announcements. One that caught my eye this morning was more of a parody. It was a funny story of, imagine this perfect world where you hire a new guy and he's on call the first night and actually doesn't have much to worry about because every alert comes with a link to a playbook. And then you get to the end and it's like, beep, beep, the real alarm kicks off. He wakes up, looks at his phone and message, service is critical. And there's no link to a playbook. And that's the reality most of us live in. So it was a well-written little article there. Something I stumbled across, can't recall if we'd brought it up on office hours before. There's a beta going on with 1Password right now. They, in their OP command line tool, 1Password command line tool, they are making it easier for you to, if your organization hasn't started using like SAML or SSO and you're using IAM user accounts or you're using static credentials with MFA, 1Password is making that situation easier, the static credentials with MFA. So if you, in this case, the secret is they created an alias for Terraform, which is OP, like plugins, Terraform, -- and then everything else after that. So basically what's happening under the hood is it's calling the 1Password CLI, getting a STS credential, getting the MFA token out of 1Password, and setting up your environment then with some credentials so you can run Terraform. I think it's great if you are using that pattern, but I think most companies who are mature now are using single sign-on, and this is not how that works.
Yeah, I have one thing to add to that. It usually when you're running Terraform, there isn't a single credential that you are targeting, right? Depending on what account you're working in and whatever, you probably need different credentials to jump around to all those different accounts. So it makes it much more difficult to try to figure that out.
Yeah, that is if you want to have the appropriate session out of the box. In this case, I think what they were doing was logging in like to an identity account or just assuming a role there. And then from there, Terraform can assume the other roles, but that's a hot topic for Cloud Posse.
Yeah, well, you know my stance on it, but I won't go down that rabbit hole right now.
Yeah,
For what it's worth, you could use the same pattern with Leap CLI to establish a session to your SSO provider rather than 1Password.
That's cool. That's probably a better solution in the end with Leap.
This is something we had people bring up like internally where they wanted like they started to wrap authentication with Terraform. And for us, we made it really clear, since most of our stuff is Amazon, that Terraform shouldn't know about your authentication. Terraform should use the SDKs to determine the authentication. So if there's an environment variable set to set it, great. If it's a profile, great. But it's assumed you're already authenticated to Amazon in some way in our environments, which is kind of what the other person was describing as well.
Yeah, maybe we should turn this into a talking point after the announcements. I want to genuinely get everyone's take on. It's a problem we've been debating internally for some time, and want to kind of figure out.
I swear, I didn't Venmo Sean before this to have him say that.
Hey, I interpreted what Sean said to match my ideals, but I can see how it matches your ideals at the same time, which is under the surface here of what we need to address. But, but yeah, very cool. Let's talk about that in a second here. All right, so that was that. Next one was GitHub Action now allows enterprises and presumably open source organizations to disable repo level self-hosted runners. Actually, I didn't realize that wasn't supported, but that is a nice precaution. So you can't just spin up your own GitHub Action runners and then exfiltrate, for example, the organizational secrets that were passed to the jobs. Configuring, this was an announcement from Pulumi. Pulumi's been working on this off and on for some time, I feel like, but they have enhanced apparently the support of this considerably to, by their own account, basically export any Terraform at this point, any to Pulumi native code. Now, what that means is there are still a couple situations which are not supported, in which case it will put a comment, a to-do comment in the code instead. It's sounding, by their own account, they're saying that it's able to convert 90 to 95% to native Pulumi code, which is then presumably TypeScript or Python or whatever you are using. Next, I wanted to get some announcements from Kubernetes, but yep, oh, nope, that didn't work. So as part of the, internet-wide protest right now against Reddit shutting down the free API access, lots of public communities are going private. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, go on.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think I read an article that it was at this point over 9,000 public communities went private in response to this. And the actual conversion from public to private actually created a DDoS on Reddit's APIs, as a result. So.
Yeah, I saw that some of the theories were that, they weren't maybe caching private communities because they didn't get as much traffic. So maybe that was one.
Yeah.
I see a bunch of other articles coming out, but I feel like they're clickbaity. So I'm not reacting to it, but just that people are complaining that the quality of Google search results has now gone down as well as a result of the Reddit forums going down, presumably because Google is now dropping those pages in its SERPs, so they're not showing up.
Yeah, and I think that I find it funny that the reaction was basically doubling down, basically just saying like, yeah, we understand, we're still going to charge you the same pricing structure that we planned on it. So I think Reddit is gonna shoot themselves in the foot by doing this, but I hope that's not true.
This is a really interesting game of chicken they're playing, seeing how it's played out in other times. Also, given that the reason why Reddit is what Reddit is today, because Dig royally screwed up, right? When they did their redesign and prioritization algorithms. Yeah.
And then the other problem is that the guy that I'm blanking out on the name of that, the most popular like Reddit client, basically said like he did the math, and there's literally no feasible way to charge his users any kind of rate that would allow him to pay his API bill, never mind his actually make a profit on his product, which is what he's been trying to do. And then some crazy amount of users like actually use that as a Reddit front end out there, like some huge percentage.
Yeah.
So really, really dumb on Reddit's part. They're going to screw themselves at the end of the day, but oh well.
And sad for the smaller, app developers or whatnot who see like their business evaporate overnight or their product evaporate overnight. HashiCorp decides to make Terraform closed source. Just
although if Reddit were smart, they would just acquire that guy's client that everyone uses and make that the default Reddit client.
It would have probably staved off some of the revolt. I'm sure there still would have been revolt, but I cut it down by half or something. All right. Let's see, what else do I have here? Oh, yeah, looks like a early draft of something here, but thought it was kind of neat. A VSCode extension. If you can see this here, it gives you a progress bar of your plan, kind of like the way that Jenkins used to work or works. Over time it learns how long the plans take or the jobs take, and then it estimates how much is left with your Terraform plan or apply. Now, if you need this feature, you might want to consider breaking your Terralith apart into smaller modules, but I know there's still some things in AWS land that are slow, Elasticsearch clusters and RDS and so forth. So,
yeah, and good luck predicting how long those are going to take. I've found that they vary wildly for those large things, depending on how much load AWS has going on at the time.
But this uses AI. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, great.
It doesn't actually use AI.
And for what it's worth, init, validate, and output, and all those things now are pretty much built in. I think all those commands are built into the official HashiCorp VSCode plugin that they released an updated version of not that long ago.
Okay. Cool. Can't recall if we brought this up. The GA of inspector scanning Lambda functions came out, so just bringing that to everyone's attention.
I wonder if that's what took down Lambda.
That is that's very coincidental.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I read this. I was like, oh, someone had some setting wrong, or they didn't realize the impact of what it was going to be to scan this at scale or something silly. And because Lambda was down for quite some time.
Yeah, I like the conspiracy theory there.
It was only one region there, correct? Just US East 1, or is this a multi?
Yeah, but that's the region. There's a lot of stuff that keep systems point back to US.
Yeah, but you couldn't auth in multiple regions for at least during some stretch of time during that whole thing, because I tried to authenticate to like 4 different regions. I kept jumping around to see if I could get in because I was working on something for a customer, and I just couldn't start a session to AWS at that point. But that only lasted for like 15 minutes, then I came back.
Got it. Good to know. Thanks.
Let's see. Lots of announcements. This is related to AWS's security suite. I only took out 2 of them that stood out to me. I feel like a lesser known service in AWS is Audit Manager. It's also one of the few services that doesn't have any Terraform endpoint or resources to manage it. But what it does is aggregate all of your findings from Security Hub and other sources so that you can give access to auditors. Well, now what they've done is they've added the ability apparently to do forms. So you can come up with your own assessment questionnaires that you send out to vendors, and then Audit Manager can be your centralized database of all those responses. Then that can be exported as CSV and shared with your auditors. So they give an example of using it with vendors and partners. And
that process is actually a process that needs to be standardized. That's the most one-off thing I've ever dealt with, like the whole vendor security questionnaire thing, and they take so much time to fill out and do. Like if we had a common format where you could like export your your security posture to some some standard format and then hand it to them and their tool could import that standard format, that would be awesome. We need a standards body to get on that.
Yeah.
Didn't this come up recently? Like one of the products out there could help complete those things automatically using AI.
Yeah, there've been several that have attempted to assist in them for sure.
Yeah, but a standardized format would be cool.
Yeah, there's actually a service or a SaaS vendor called Security Scorecard. Quick FYI, I used to work there, so it might be a little biased. And they actually made a security questionnaire as part of their platform. As far as I know, is getting pretty good traction. And the idea was you could see your vendor's cybersecurity ratings, and they do an outside-in approach. As I mentioned, it did work there, so take that as a I know too much about it.
Yeah,
but
I think I'm flipping it on its end. Like, let's say you're Cloud Posse and you want to do work for JP Morgan Chase, right? So JP Morgan Chase is going to send you a 200-page security questionnaire that you have to fill out. That's in their format on their particular Excel spreadsheet that they figured out exactly how they want to have you fill it out and score the risk assessment and all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got to fill this huge thing back and email it back to them. And then the next week you're going to do work for Bank of America. So they send you a completely different format, but it's all asking the same things in just different ways. And that's all I'm saying. Like if there was some way that like you could publish your security posture in a standardized way, and then those vendors could then consume your security posture from that standardized way, it would save information security professionals around the world, like, tens of thousands of hours a year. So
yeah, I believe they've got a product of that, like they've embedded that into their platform. So their primary product, if I'm not mistaken, was just outside in giving you a score, like an A through F rating of, hey, you've got old SSL cryptography, like ciphers, whatnot, and it'll do an outside in and give you a score. And there's some math they do on the back end for that. And then some of the functional features that they have once you're in the platform is the questionnaire. I have not used it myself personally. I've seen demos of it. And as far as I know, it's in the platform, and I believe it's on the free tier, but they're headed in that direction. It sounds like there's an overlap in feature set of what AWS is trying to do here, as well as what they do, except what they do is more general. As far as I know, it's you could send it out like for your particular use case. But I
think the problem is that this is yet another vendor's implementation of some way to solve it, where like the industry, as an example, has accepted whatever, like ISO 27001 as a standard, and people like audit to that, or PCI or HIPAA or whatever. Like if there were actually like a open security posture format or whatever that you could exchange information in, that would probably like save people a ton of times. And I think a commercial body can't do it. It really has to be like a standards body that releases it, and then a bunch of commercial products will adhere to the standard, like once the standard would be defined. It's definitely not something that would be done overnight. I'm just throwing out it would be really nice if we could ...
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with having a more standard versus trying to have one commercial vendor trying to accomplish this. That's probably not going to happen. But
well, it happened. What is the format when we were talking about the security lake? last week. What is the format that all the logs are in?
Yeah, I forget the name of it, but I mean, there are definitely lots of security formats for, for things out there. I'm just saying it takes, large, nonprofit governing bodies for people to write an RFC for it to be discussed, for it to be, batted back and forth, and then finally agreed to, and then all the major players in that area then have to agree to like adopt those standards. And once you get a little bit of momentum, then it starts to be the industry starts to move that way. It's just, to my knowledge, no one has done this yet, and or has started to work on it. But it would literally save like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of man hours a year, across the industry by doing that.
Yep. All right, moving on. Next announcement, also security related. Security Hub releases the ability to have automation rules, so you can take specific actions on findings, such as updating them, suppressing them in near real time. I'm not sure what else it's integrated with. I don't think it's for like automatic remediation, in other words. All right. Any other announcements before we move into discussions?
I pasted 4 links in the Zoom chat and in the Slack. There
Awesome.
were security related announcements. I think all of them were from Reinforce, which is still happening. And I have to drop in like 5 minutes. So I don't think I'm gonna have time to present all of them.
Okay. Any of these you want to highlight? Oh, this is amazing. This is awesome. So we don't need to deploy a Lambda anymore for this?
Nice.
Except
I
for
didn't see this.
we've been kicking this can down the road for a long time, and we just finally operationalized it. And then this. All right, well, there you have it. And let's see what's the next one here. Verified permissions now is GA.
There are a lot of dumb takes about this on the internet, especially regarding pricing. They're hilariously wrong. Just ignore them.
Okay.
AWS actually I tweeted about this. They did a really nice thing with pricing. So Amazon Verified Permissions does authorization for your application. So stuff like user X can access this photo that's connected to this medical, I don't know, record in your app, assuming you're doing a medical app or whatever. And it's implementing that checking with validation, with AWS logging, with compliance, with all that. It's lovely. And there are only 2 players in the area, Amazon Verified Permissions and also HQ.com, I want to say, I don't know. And AWS could have been really, really horrible and aggressively discounted Amazon Verified Permission pricing to undercut them and totally destroy your startup. They didn't do that. They have the exact same pricing. So this whole industry, AWS with this pricing really did a good job. Kudos to them. They didn't destroy the whole tiny industry of 2 companies. And it's exciting, but everybody's looking at, oh my God, every single request in my app is now suddenly gonna get I don't know, 15 hundredths of a cent or something. And that's just ridiculous. And a lot of knee-jerk reactions from people that only read like the top title and the pricing page, which is annoying me to no end.
That's good that you call that out. Thanks. Yeah, I know we've that's come up now a few times, verified permissions. So cool that that's GA now. And what is this here? Software bill of materials export capability in Amazon Inspector.
So if you're stressed to implement software bill of materials, Amazon Inspector can now just do it for you.
Cool.
Are you actively using Inspector? I'm just curious if anybody else is here is using it heavily.
I have some clients that are using it, but I haven't been that involved, so I cannot comment on it.
Okay.
Like,
I've been looking at it as well. I haven't used it. I'm not using it. I was just looking at it.
I haven't heard any like major complaints about it, but I can say I've been listening too much.
I don't know the details. I know we have support for Inspector. We deploy it with Terraform.
Yeah, we've done it for customers who are like building their own Docker images and stuff. We've been using that for like scan on push and things like that. But and we've also deployed it a few times, like to EC2 instances as well. But I don't think we have a lot of heavy experience in like using it day to day. I don't really know. I haven't done much on that.
Yeah. Let's see. What else to highlight? Config recording, exclusions by resource type.
Oh yeah, so config was super pricey because you couldn't exclude stuff. Now you can, and this is gonna reduce bills for a lot of people. Folks are really excited about this one.
That is,
Yeah, actually, our AWS utils provider includes a resource that I wrote specifically so that you can disable config rules that were automatically enabled by standards out there for this particular purpose, because we had some people who were not keen that it would just, you know, target everything. I forget the exact resource name, but I remember writing it. No, it's in our actual.
no, I know.
provider.
I was just public service announcement is we have published all of our compliance components here, or there's an open PR for them. Yeah, here's like AWS Config. So if you're looking to deploy Security Hub, AWS Config, Guard Duty, all of that, it's available from our component library. All right.
One other thing, well, just to go back to your previous announcement really quickly, Eric, if you open up, I just pasted it in Zoom chat. Take care, Vlad. That you can actually do remediations with those new rules. So that's actually the list of actions that you can take right in those bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
You can do all of those things in response to like a change in Security Hub.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, since it supports Lambdas at the least, basically anything is possible.
Well, yeah, and also EC2 run commands and step functions. So between the two, all three of those things, you can do almost like anything. You know, like reapply your Terraform, even if you wanted to, like you can do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If you detected drift or something.
All right. Any more announcements? Let's see here. I haven't seen everything here. Sean posted something here.
I'm really curious on the SSO to from Google Workspace. If Google Workspace now supports SCIM or if they did it some other way. I don't know if it actually said in the announcement. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, you already checked the announcement.
Yeah, it doesn't really say how. It just says that you can.
Because SAML doesn't do that.
No, that's what SCIM is. Basically, it's
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, usually like with other IDPs, like if we're using like Okta or Auth0 or any of those kind of things, they support SCIM. So you can basically set up a rule that tells it which users or groups you want it to send over to AWS or whatever this thing's called, the IAM Identity Center, and then it will automatically provision and deprovision those users when they no longer exist, or where they exist or no longer exist in the source IDP. So it'd be very interesting to see if Google fixed this by supporting SCIM, or if this is something that AWS did because so many customers wanted to do it with Google Workspaces. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more.
All right. Well, let's go into Q&A. Anybody, well, there was one thing I wanted to cover again, but maybe let's see. Anybody have public questions you want to have discussed today? If not, we have the topic we started talking about earlier. I'd love to dig into a little bit more. So we have an internal debate that's been going on where role assumption should be happening, and also an effort to simplify in some ways what we are doing because we're doing it in native Terraform. So what we have been doing at Cloud Posse forever is, you log in with your SSO credentials, either through AWS SSO or federated IAM and SAML, and you ultimately have a role assumed in one account, in an identity account. And then from there, the Terraform more or less figures out, knows what role it needs to do any operation in any account. And it's able to do that because we built like a framework within Terraform, and we can look up and fetch what roles should be used in certain accounts to apply Terraform. On the one side, it's magical. On the other side, it's confusing. So it's magical because as an end user working with the Terraform code, everything just works. It figures out what it needs to use, what roles and which accounts. But in order to do that, it's quite complex. And it's not easily explained to users, like what role is going to be used to perform a certain operation. So we've been going back and forth, like what is the right solution? A lot of companies will use a wrapper tool, for example, that assumes a role explicitly before calling Terraform, as opposed to having Terraform use a data source to look up the role and then assume that role. And the assertion, well, okay, the assertion there is that it's possibly less convoluted if the role is known before calling Terraform. And it simplifies things as well, because whatever role you have assumed, that's what you can do. And Terraform is not doing any additional role assumption behind the scenes. This pattern works well for almost like 99% of use cases. It doesn't work well when Terraform, the pattern when you assume the role before calling Terraform does not work well if you ever want to have Terraform, connect to endpoints like VPC endpoints, or to set up to do any cross-account linkage between AWS.
VPC peering is another good one.
Yeah. So
by that last point, do you mean when you might be hitting multiple accounts in the same set of Terraform?
Yeah, in the same Terraform code.
Yeah, we had that same problem. We solved it another way. Yeah.
So
I'm curious if you just solved it by breaking the pieces into two sides, like the center.
I wasn't involved when they did it. I don't know if I would do it the same way. It was for networking. That's normally where it's needed, like you said, VPC endpoints, Route 53, different things that are shared. Yeah, we did that by really lazy, making a common providers file with tons of aliases in it that held like the VPC endpoints and all those type of things. I'd have to show it, I guess, it's not anything fancy, but there's like a common providers file that has every single possible profile and the settings for that particular profile. And then it just reads from that. It's not even a lookup.
Yeah. I think that works well when you have the privilege of kind of doing a closed source in a organization with its own, that can define all of its own requirements and limits. And we have our double-edged sword is we have to try and make everything work in general for yet unknown requirements. So we try not to do that, but that would work. Matt? Yeah, do you want to get your, maybe add more information to the, context of why you should maybe not have Terraform doing role assumption?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective, I've been the major arguer of the side of assuming a role first before you do Terraform. I think that it's unintuitive to me that when as a developer, as a consumer of Terraform modules, that if I do run something that I don't really know what account it's going to operate on, like I can't easily grok by running my commands, like where things are going to be operated on and how that's going to be and what role I'm assuming and what permissions I should be looking for on that role, etc. And I know how to find the answer, but it's not easily accessible in like off the top of my head. Where if I assume a particular role and then I run something and I see like access denied, I'm like, oh, the role I just assumed doesn't have rights to do the thing that I just tried to do. And it's really easy for me to troubleshoot that and go back and say, like, let me see what this role is, let's see what its permissions are, etc. And I think anytime you automate the switching of security contexts, without like explicitly asking the user if they want to do that, that's often like off-putting from an end user's perspective. Those are kind of my two major arguments of why.
Yeah, anyone have a comment on that or agreement or disagreement?
And I could just second that. I think when you're troubleshooting authentication, yeah, having the direct errors is helpful.
Yeah, I said the same in chat earlier on. We don't. If I'm talking to Amazon, I want to talk to Amazon in general. Like I might want to use AWS CLI. I might want to use Terraform. I might want to use a dozen other different tools. I don't want Terraform to be the thing that's handling and knowing about the authentication. That's why it's in the credential chain link. It should just obey the credential chain, whatever you've set in the environment.
Yeah, I think to be fair, like the way we're using it is still, it's still like an Amazon supported way. We're basically just having like the Terraform provider for AWS and like the backend, the state provider for S3, et cetera. Like we'll take role arns, as inputs of which role should be assumed, and clearly we're using that. I don't think it's not a customized like way to authenticate to it. I'll say but it's definitely not like whatever I've authenticated to in my environment is the credentials I'm using. That's usually the easiest way for me to kind of reason about what's happening. And with the way our components are currently set up, that isn't what happens, and it's often like confusing. And you have to dig through a lot of stuff to figure out what happened.
Something though that I did in the past, and I've said this before, and I've gotten curious looks. So I thought I would mention it at some point here. Maybe this is the right time. There's something called role session naming that allows you to trace back and CloudTrail what a particular session has been doing in various APIs on your account. Has anybody else ever used role session naming to say trace what Terraform is calling, or other services like your not services, clients such as your AWS CLI?
I've actually done that recently. I haven't really put it fully into effect, but I was absolutely able to just add that parameter to the provider and then see it show up in CloudTrail just like I expected.
One thing that I've done in the past that's helped me tremendously when it gets overbearing, but I don't actually have the code right now because it was for somebody else and they own that code now. But I had made a simple Go SDK, CloudTrail SDK client that would just run a continuous query in CloudTrail of hey, here's my current login. Give me the actual trace of all of my API calls and what's passed, what's failed. And then you could write in the terminal, just see your API calls going live to CloudTrail. And that's really helpful. It's not too hard to set up. I really just cobbled it together with, yeah. So somebody's mentioning Boto 3. You could do it in Python or in Go. But I just mentioned that because not everybody knows that you can do that. And that's why you'll see in Leap and in other tools, you can name your sessions.
That'd be kind of interesting. What would be an Jeremy, what do you think would be a convention we could adopt with maybe that factors in maybe our components and using Atmos and environment, you know, in the context and so forth?
Oh, I mean, there's several that you could use. I could see it being helpful with Spacelift. So definitely it makes sense to have Spacelift cloud trails even generate on a per run. And if you could put the run identifier in there, because I think it's short enough. I forget what the limit is. I think it's a few hundred characters for the session name. You could even potentially have a link showing in your logs that just says click this and you'll go right to your run that was giving you an issue. Or I could also see it being helpful with just knowing which user is doing something. So if everybody was using that and you saw that your Terraform state was locked, you could go and look in CloudTrail and say, oh, okay, this is the last person who was running it, or oh, this is Spacelift locking it. And that might be easier for you to run something down in case you don't really know what was locking the state. But those are two examples I'm thinking of immediately. We used it for auditing at one point, so we did have all of our developers putting their email into the session name, which is helpful for just, you know, making sure that
It's just information.
That's what we do. We because we have many hundreds of accounts. We pre-generate from a template all the profiles that exist in our company, and role session name is put. You can put the role session name directly in the AWS config.
Exactly.
Obviously, if you're setting in Terraform, you can then further override if you want to change it. But you can put it with the profile directly in AWS config, and you want to do that because for assume that allows you to do assume role without executing assume role. So we don't have Terraform or anything else assume role. You can do assume role directly from the AWS config file.
Yep.
And then you just use the profile as if you were using them. That's what we do. We don't tell anything to assume role. The AWS SDK does it for us by just saying.
I think there's an environment variable too.
There's other ways to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll paste how we do it, but it's pretty.
That sounds like, I mean, we generate a large config file based on those things and export AWS profile as the environment variable that lets you select one of those. It hurts or pains me that this is like the required way of working with it in AWS. It works well once you have it and once you have it done. There's some kind of a smell to me, like if you have to generate this config file and everyone does it a different way.
But even for
AWS
SSO or now it's identity, it's the same problem. They don't give you the way to say, okay, download all of my identities. I made a wrapper that says, go get all of my SSO identities and populate them to a config. They don't make that easy. They don't assume that people are working with a huge number of accounts, which in most enterprises you are.
And yet they have the well architected stuff mentioning that, you know, having purpose built, you know, accounts is a good idea.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions we get answered today?
I have a question. So I think this is great. Question around like identity and stuff. So we're currently using AWS SSO for just identity right now, but it's kind of a mess. If you dealt with it with Terraform, you know that like permission sets and groups and some of the things don't link correctly together. I'm wondering if anybody else has kind of had that experience or maybe found some patterns that make things easier so it's not as cumbersome to kind of maintain it.
Oh, you're muted, Matt.
I just realized I would say that we had a lot of pain at the beginning, but if you take a look at our module and components that we currently use to manage it, it's gone a long way to making it much easier to Terraform, to manage it all via Terraform, or almost all of it. There's a couple of clicks that still need to happen that aren't exposed via the API, but at the end of the day, you can set up almost everything pretty easily with Terraform now.
Matt, if correct me where I'm wrong, or if I'm wrong, but I feel like the kind of the solution we've arrived at, and this is something we've spent years working to try and polish off, and I think it's finally getting better, is that AWS SSO, or Identity Center, it's really for humans. And when you're using Terraform, you're somewhere in between, the human world and an automation or GitOps world. And because of that, SSO isn't ideal for your Terraform and infrastructure as code automation. So what we have arrived at is we manage, just like you would manage IAM roles for service accounts for your services, we do that kind of a parallel set of roles that is used for infrastructure automation. So using your SSO role, we allow it to assume the infrastructure role or set of roles that we have. And then from there, everything else just works. Now, this is also really important, like if you're bringing up Kubernetes clusters, you never want to bring up a Kubernetes cluster based on a permission set, because if you change the permission set, you'll be a new role. And I believe now the role that created the cluster is borked, and you won't be able to manage that cluster. Isn't that how it is, Matt?
It is, although they fixed the thing really in SSO. Like it only creates the role again if you like delete the permission set like altogether. If you just update the permission set now, it stays consistent.
Oh, it's static now. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. But it's same thing. You don't want to do it. The same reason you don't want to do it with like, a user's, credentials either is the same reason though, is that if you like, there's a couple of things that are tied back to like the owner of some stuff in the cluster is whoever created the cluster. So you definitely, in EKS that is, so you don't want to create it as like a standalone user, because if that user leaves the company and you delete their account, like it can screw up your EKS cluster. Same idea with SSO, like if you want to have the flexibility to change any of those things. So make sure you have like a Kubernetes cluster administrator role that you can create it with, and don't delete that role basically.
So this is why, well, yeah, I don't know. Sean, I struggle because I can see the argument from both angles. Because we have these deterministic roles that we provision and manage, now it's really easy to know exactly who we need to grant access to perform those operations. So that's, I think that's ultimately what led us down this path, is to have deterministic role names that we could rely on. But when you're
we have that. That's what I'm separating the authentication part from what the role names are. So like we do define all the role names, in a declarative way. We put in the Terraform TFRs the profile name to use, which is tied to a role. Every profile in our case is tied to a role, or every profile is tied to a role, but it represents a role. The way, I'm not going to show how we name our own, but each profile is assumed to be, this is the role you're getting. But the only part that we don't have Terraform doing is the actual authentication to get the creds. That happens before Terraform. Yeah. Because we had a problem where people used to put this into Terraform or into their own scripts, and then they'd be running it and they wrote it specifically to use environment variables. And then suddenly they wanted to use an instance profile and their code didn't work because they didn't just respect the AWS credential chain. They had made it to just use AWS SSO or just use this or just use that. If you just inherit from the credential chain, then no matter what tool you use, it will just work.
So and Eric, that's the complexity in our solution, where we have to have like multiple AWS configs depending on what is doing, whether it's a user, whether it's Spacelift, whether it's, you know, whatever the other one is. We have another config.
That's using the credential chain, right? I mean, that is exactly
Well,
the credential chain, the list of things that the SDK looks at.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, we just use a credential chain. Like if it's a user on their local machine, like my machine, if I went to my AWS config file right now, I have about 600 different profiles in my AWS config right now.
But you have to generate another one of those configs or something like that for your CI context, no?
No. No. It can use depending on the we had something that generated them depending on the context. So I, as an SRE, have one config file. Someone who's a normal dev would have a different config file. The machine ones, they get a subset depending on what access they need. So based on the group or the whatever in our parent account that you switch from, based on that, you define your privileges. If you're talking a principal in an account, we're more specific for that, I guess. Like I guess it is a complex one. It's easier to whiteboard it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that gets complicated is authentication, and I think we talked about it before, is like authentication and state buckets and sharing shared configuration, and
Yeah.
it's all tangentially related to this entire this entire discussion.
Sean, were you on the call when we talked about reducing the scope and access to parts of a state bucket? Is that something you've solved?
No, I don't know if I was on that call.
You were on the call, but you just said that you guys were using something different to store shared config.
That's
between
different. Yeah,
components
I was
and-
talking about storing
yeah.
Terraform outputs separately.
Yeah.
That's different. Like the actual state. No, we haven't solved anything with the state. And we do have our state files are based on the role you have. You'll have permissions or you won't have permissions to it. It's standard, S3 policy management in that case.
What we haven't been able to solve is narrowly scoping those roles to the state bucket so that you could have different levels of roles all sharing the same Terraform state bucket.
I'd have to look at how we did that. Someone else on our team set it up, but we do have
It
roles
gets-
narrowed down, but it probably was manual and tedious.
It gets really complicated when you start to have to use like path prefixes for role or for access control, basically in there, because then you have to design your entire like state hierarchy to match like something that could aligns with how you want to grant permissions, and it doesn't give you like a full flexibility or easily flexible way to say like these groups of people should be able to have read access to these sets of components in these accounts.
That's something we're
just
actually
talking
looking
about
to.
before.
There's probably something we will have to solve. Right now, we don't have to solve because in our production environments, only my team has access. So we don't allow anybody else to have access. We don't have to. It's you're an SRE or you're not. So we haven't had to do that lockdown. You'd also have to consider, do you allow remote state reads? Because then it gets more complicated. Can you read or write the state?
Exactly. That was
Those are all the things we're talking about. Yeah, all those things are complicated.
Yeah, we haven't had to solve for that because for production, we have a very limited number of people that can touch it. It's assumed by the time it gets to production, it's the same code's been run in dev and int, so you shouldn't be needing to mess with it too much. So
you have like one bucket per stage in that case, or?
Yeah, I mean, every tier has a bucket.
Yeah.
And then we do have some policies around the different profiles, but
yeah. But
our security is we just don't have very few people have access to products. So
yeah, That's the most practical.
The easiest. Sometimes you want to give more people access, but it's easy.
Let's see here. Michael was posting a message here. This is a complex topic and any discussion helps with a use case or context. If we want a simple role, one role, one account is easy. We create different roles because the world is full of different actors with different goals. So we create a detonation zone because there are at least 3 different actors: the right action, the mistake action, and the malicious action. But it's not just the detonation zones. We also divide our architecture along other ways, maybe infrastructure versus applications for different state files. All right, yeah. Then there are PE versus DevOps. What's PE in this context?
Platform engineering.
Right.
Platform engineering.
So I'm
DevOps.
Yeah, I mean to indicate, are you building this tool chain, this environment, this solution? Do you build it to run it for yourself? Or are you a team that's building parts of it for other teams to consume? And so those influence how we think about the roles that we're laying out. You know, is someone else going to use your service catalog? Or did you build your service catalog for your team? And that may affect the way you approach managing roles as well. So I think we all have these valid arguments from different perspectives. We discover lately that we may be arguing about 2 different approaches because we're seeking to solve a different problem, each one of us, when we go into that discussion. And I think you have to start with the discussion of what are you trying to achieve, and what's the context of the problem. Anytime you deal with something that's as complicated as this can become, because team A and team B are trying to solve different problems using the same tools, right? We're all talking roles and permissions and where state files. Did we do two different state buckets for this, or different stacks? How did you divide it? But you have to come with the use case first, I think, and describe that context first, or you'll find that you've wasted as long as I've discussed this talking about 2 different problems.
Yeah, that is really true. You cannot. It's really difficult to optimize for multiple things at the same time. And
yeah.
But to your earlier point, I'm not sure who mentioned it. Writing some sort of standard tool for just producing and maintaining large AWS config files would be useful. We wrote something internally for our use case at the time. I told the person, you should make it generic and open. And he's like, I'm not going to bother. And he wrote it, and it's very specific to our use case. But I can see how it could be altered to be.
Like, we've wanted to do that. We've wanted to be the company that does that. But I think it's really hard to make it generic without a lot of assumptions, and ours as well has assumptions on our framework. While it's reusable across our customers, it wouldn't be reusable for people not using our reference architecture. But Sean, it's been really interesting to hear at the solutions you've arrived at, because it's not that we've been talking about them before as much, but you've arrived at very similar solutions. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, and again, it's for our use case, but as I said, it's not just used by my team. My team has to maintains hundreds of Amazon accounts that are used by all of our developers. And each development team has different accounts and different roles and different profiles. And so we've gone this very simple, generate AWS config files, use assume role, but via the AWS config. So the developers don't have to write assume role functions. They just put the profile name in, and they're done. And that's worked well. It's been very intelligible to the developers. It doesn't require much training. So yeah, and it's compatible with every model, like whether you're using the model that existed before AWS Identity or using Identity, these different models, it's compatible with all of them. So it works well for us.
All right, everyone. It's been a good chat. Thanks for joining our office hours this week. We'll post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if there's some part of this you want to share with your team, that's a great way to do it. Go to youtube.com/Cloud Posse. Again, youtube.com/Cloud Posse. If you haven't joined our Slack team yet, go to slack.cloudposse.com and connect. We have an office hours channel there, as well as many other channels with a large emphasis on AWS, Terraform, and Kubernetes. We syndicate the list of interesting links or a subset of them via our newsletter. You can subscribe by going to newsletter.cloudposse.com. Also, our podcast is a syndication of office hours as well. So if you want to listen in the car, that's another way. Connect with me on LinkedIn by going to linkedin.com/in/Osterman and connect. Or if you're interested in working with Cloud Posse or seeing what our solutions look like and if they can move the needle for you and the organization, go to cloudposse.com/quiz, take a few quick questions and book a session with me directly. And we'll go over your use case. Have a great rest of your week, everyone. See you next week, same time, same place.